The Renewable Development Fund was developed through legislation in 1994. So right now we're having our 20th anniversary. And the mission of the Renewable Development Fund is to increase the market penetration of electrical energy in Minnesota. It's very focused on electrical energy, so when we talk about things such as energy conservation, energy efficiencies, those are not things that the RDF funds, because the funding, it comes solely from Minnesota Xcel Energy electrical ratepayers. So if you're a Xcel electrical customer, appreciate your support of the RDF. You'll see there's a rate rider on your bill that goes into the Renewable Development Fund. It's also to fund startup and expansion of projects within electrical energy projects and companies within Minnesota. So it's kind of looking at new things, what new things are out there. So it's not a straightforward, incentive type program. It's trying to find out what is the new, the cutting edge type, innovative type thing. So there's that aspect to the fund. It funds both energy generation. Also, it focuses on research and development, which is kind of unique for a lot of funding programs. Sometimes that research aspect is kind of lost. It also is to funds demonstratable projects. So projects that they've done some of the research on it, but they still have to demonstrate how it can work before it goes to the commercial scale. So focus is also on demonstrating potential renewable projects, and we've funded a number of those. And also is to provide benefits to Minnesota citizens, businesses, and Xcel Energy's ratepayers that support the fund. The fund, as I mentioned, was authorized in 1994 by legislation. That comes out of a Prairie Island settlement for the storage of nuclear casks. So there's a tie-in between the RDF and nuclear. Xcel Energy has to pay into the RDF or obligate to the RDF on an annual basis amount of money per cask being stored at Prairie Island. At that time, right now, it's $500,000 per dry cask at Prairie Island, and now about 6 years ago, they started storing waste at the Monticello plant in dry casks, and it's $350,000 per dry cask at Monticello. So every year, the contribution to the fund is based on the dry cask storage. Last year was $19.5 million. So it's a significant chunk of change, that goes into funds. But for those funds, all the utilities within that state contribute a share to that fund. In Minnesota, though, Xcel Energy is the only company that supports a fund. So we're kind of unique. We're the only utility managed and owned type RDF in the United States. But the funding comes from Xcel Energy electric ratepayers. It's overseen by the Minnesota Public Utility Commission, MPUC. They kind of approve, the expenditures and the awards, and they provide the oversight. It's administered by Xcel Energy, and that's what my role is. I'm the grant administrator. I make sure that the grantees and the projects are doing what they're supposed to be doing. And it's an independent advisory group provides the funding recommendation and kind of provides some of the leadership and guidance, to what is to be funded, what awards are to be, what projects are to be selected for awards. So an independent advisory group provides that aspect. That group is composed of 7 members. 2 members are from the environmental representatives, one of them being here with the Isaac Walton League, Eric Jensen, who you're probably familiar with because I believe he's on your board. The other environmental representative position right now is open. So we do have an opening for that position on the advisory group. 2 representatives are from customer reps. One customer rep is for large industrial customers, and that is that's Ben Gerber. And the other representative is for the residential customers, and that is Lisa Trudeau with the Department of Commerce. We also have two representatives from Xcel Energy representing the company, Kevin Schwain and Tammy Gunderzik. And we have one representative from the Prairie Island Indian community, Heather Westra, and that representation comes from the fact that the fund initially started out of Prairie Island legislation. The advisory group, though, is tasked with identifying funding priorities and funding selections. I do want to add, if you have any questions, raise your hand, stop me. I'll try my best to answer them. As of today, we've had 4 funding cycles. The funding cycles are not regular, every 2 years, every 3 years. They're irregular cycles that depend upon usually when we have a big enough chunk of money, to go forward with a request for proposal. The first one was in 2001. Second was in 2003, 2007, and 2013. So you can see they're kind of irregular. And usually we try to get around $25, $35 million as a chunk of money to have a funding cycle. We are considering, as far as going out in the future, we're considering having smaller and maybe more regular RFPs. So instead of having a $25 million RFP, funding a very focused thing that but only maybe $8 million or $10 million, but a much smaller amount of money. There's been some problems with large money that are very wide open because we're funding everything from research to energy production. There are a number of benefits though that we have gotten from the RDF in the last from the first cycle back in 2001. In that time of the RDF projects that have been funded, both energy and research, the fund has leveraged about $97 million. What's been paid out is, let's see, I wrote that down someplace. About $76 million has been paid out, so about $96 million has been leveraged. So it's a bit over $1 for every RDF dollar that goes out, brings in money that comes in. Typically, the energy production projects have a little bit more leverage funding than the research projects. It's really hard for the research projects to find leverage funding. They like the RDF though because for many research projects such as the Department of Energy, they don't want to have a federal match. Well, with the RDF, it's a totally independent and private fund, so it meets their leverage and matching funds criteria so well. It has been difficult to get real actual values of economic costs on the local level. One thing that I try it with the grantees is what you have to. How do you demonstrate what the actual economic value is? And a lot of times you'll get, well, it increases the property value or it increases the income coming into the community. Well, how do you show that? That kind of information has been very, very difficult to get. It'd be great to have some actual good data to show just what value and what benefits comes back to a community. But I found that to be very hard to actually get that you can support. But another economic value comes in from avoided costs and the environmental value behind the energy that is generated. Avoided costs would be if you install a kilowatt of renewable power, that's one less kilowatt of power you have to install in a coal plant or some other non-renewable plant. There's a value to that. You also have avoided energy costs. That would mean for every kilowatt hour that you generate from a renewable source, there's a value because now you don't have to generate that value, that same kilowatt hour from from coal or natural gas or a non-renewable source. the externality values that we use to calculate our environmental value are going to be changing in about 2014. I see that the commissioners are working on determining the new values for that. So, but that's how we calculate what those avoided costs are. There's also some, from the research perspective, we get an educational, we've had some educational benefits. We've had 44 articles published in scientific journals with the research projects we funded. We've had 129 presentations given in conferences and seminars and work. I'm not going to count this one towards that, but there's probably no scientific value for what I'm saying. And we've had 5 patents applied for through some of the research that has been funded. It's getting getting some real reportable and tangible benefits and things from some of the research projects is like pulling teeth, though. It can be very hard to show, well, how has the body of knowledge really expanded because of this project? Well, this is one way we feel we can kind of track that. But we also have some energy results. The RDF is funded. This is through the grants. This is not included through the REPI programs or the other legislative programs. They have helped build facilities, but these numbers do not reflect the legislative programs. But from the grant awards, there's been just under 24,000 kilowatts of capacity installed, and about 287,000 megawatt hours of power has been generated. So if you take all that, that's enough power on an annual basis to power about 81,000 homes is what we're generating now from facilities installed through the RDF. We've been able to track from, you're generating all this power, what does the environmental impact of that? And if you take that many megawatt hours, it's about 400,000 pounds of carbon has been reduced from emissions. Now, this ratio is probably a little bit lower than what's sometimes if you use carbon emissions regarding automobiles, because we're using the carbon emissions coming from a coal plant. So if you compare the carbon emissions of sometimes you see this many megawatt hours reduces so many barrels of oil and how many pounds of carbon. That's not quite an accurate comparison, because we're not replacing, until we get more electric vehicles out there, we're not replacing gasoline, we're replacing coal to produce electricity. Also, we've reduced about 725 pounds of sulfide emissions and about 550 pounds of nitrate emissions.
Those are cumulative?
That's cumulative, yes, over the first 3 funding cycles, and how many kilowatts have been installed. You can see a large amount has gone to biomass projects. About 39% of the project awards, just around $14 million, has gone to biomass energy production projects, but only a very small amount has been actually installed. Whereas a very small amount has gone to wind of 12%, but a very large amount has actually been generated. The reason for this is for like wind and especially with hydro, they can be almost, especially hydro is a base load type renewable, so it runs constantly unless the water flows get too low or whatever. That hydro project has only been operational for about 1 year. It's already consuming about 43, takes up about 43% of our generation. The reason the wind is very big is because the RDF, like I mentioned earlier, was to support new and emerging technologies. Back in 2001, wind was not really widely known. It's fairly new, so we did fund some regular 1.5 and 2 megawatt wind turbines. Well, those have been running now since 2003, and so we have a lot of wind generation that has kind of bumped up our numbers. Wind was not an eligible technology in the third cycle because they already had, we needed to put the money towards other funding alternatives, and so that therefore solar has become much more of a prominent technology. Like I mentioned earlier, there's not a lot of funds out there that actually funds research. For even our energy production projects, though, we do like to have a research or an education component because otherwise it just is an incentive fund. And we really want to promote, to kind of get the market penetration that we want to see in renewables. There has to be some way to get that information out there, even if it's an energy production project. How much is it generating? You know, what is the value behind that? You know, so we think it's important for the public to know what's happening there. Yes.
What type of storage delivery is that?
Coming from an area at a certain time. We're good at forecasting how much wind is coming, but how much power is actually in that wind. You know, so it took in consideration the amount of turbines, the speed of the wind, you know, the conditions. It was actual power forecasting from an area, not so much the wind forecasting. Tower designs, company Blattner and Sons from the St. Cloud area designed a self-erecting wind tower where the platform would go up and down the column of a wind turbine like an elevator, so you did not have to use the big cranes to hoist the nice seals up to the top. Plus, that way, if you have to, when you decommission that tower, you know, you have the platform already in place, so you don't have to bring a big crane in place. They found it to be especially very economical if you have a very small wind farm with only a couple wind turbines, because the cost of mobilizing a big crane for 1 or 2 turbines can be very expensive. Plus, we looked at St. Anthony Falls Laboratory, part of the University of Minnesota, has looked at wind turbulence and how the turbulence affects the performance of other turbines downstream. Solar, we've looked at manufacturing process of thin film and looking at inkjet application for manufacturing better way of manufacturing thin film PV, and looked at new materials such as nanocrystals and low band gap organic materials. So the research has been kind of interesting. Well, and then with biomass, we've looked at ways to develop cleaner burns through gasification of biomass, ways of cleaning up, if you have anaerobic digestion, ways of cleaning up the methane stream so that it does not wear out your engines as quickly. Sustainable cropping and harvesting techniques if you're looking at harvesting biomass. So there's the research has been really all over the place as far as what the RDF has funded. This kind of goes, taking a step backwards here, but I thought this graph was kind of interesting. This here shows the electrical generation from when we first started generating power in about 2006 to where we're at now. And as you can see, the wind has been a big part of the power generated from the RDF. We started generating some solar, starting with a science museum in St. Paul, which is only like 9 kilowatts, so it's like a tiny, tiny system. But in 2007, we started generating a little bit of solar, and that's creeped up. We got a little bit bigger now that we have Outland on board, and also the Convention Center and St. John's University is 400 kilowatts. So.
Why has the total power decreased versus 2015?
The hydro here?
The total.
That's because the hydro has dipped down a little bit. Yeah. 11 megawatt wind farm, and it tried to look at how do you firm up wind power by having a battery storage so that when the wind's not blowing, you can continue to provide power. When there's not a need to deliver that wind, it can charge the battery. So what they found, though, was kind of interesting was that the optimum battery capacity to the size of the wind farm is between 20 and 40%. So you don't want to have a battery the same size as your wind farm. So, but you also don't want the battery to be too small, because there is an arbitrage value that FERC and the way power is dispersed with having wind storage capacity. And if you have less battery capacity, you will not capture enough off-peak wind to bring up that value. So there's a number of different factors when it comes to wind, the value of wind power when you add batteries, and it's not just on, well, we have more, power to provide. Because one thing that we found out with the wind battery is that you could provide, the battery could receive value as an ancillary service on how the whole grid is managed by the, so there's some ancillary benefits to wind that I thought I wasn't thinking about that when those results came in. We have had, yes. We've had 2 hydro projects. One has actually been commissioned and has started. That would be the St. Anthony Falls Hydro Facility. It's a 9.176 run-of-river hydrological facility. Run-of-river means that instead of putting in a dam that builds a lot of pressure, it uses the natural flow of the river. In this case, there was an auxiliary lock in the upper lower St. Anthony Falls dam that was not being utilized. When they built the dam structure originally, they overbuilt it for maybe another lock to be put in. It wasn't used, so they put in these run-of-river turbines that, as the water flows through, comes down and through here and out the bottom, and there's a turbine that spins in there. This here are flood control gates that control the level of the water. So they can raise it up if they need the water to be higher. They can lower it to let the water over. So that's basically just flood control there. They're called open mire gates is what the technical term for that would be. We've had some biomass projects. A lot of our biomass projects have really been the research related. Bepex did a project where they took, in this case, corn stover, and through torrefaction, they used to convert it into a coal-like type product that you can't mix this in a biomass in a coal facility. This is very similar to coal as far as grindability, transportability. It was to create how can you use biomass in the facilities that you have now? It has, it won't rot. Whereas you take the corn stove or wood chips, whatever, you set that outside, it's going to rot. The biomass, the biocoal, it's hydrophobic. It's not going to break down, deteriorate. They estimated a cost for a 150,000 ton biocoal plant. That would be to make that would be about $31 million. So at this point, the cost to generate that, it would add about, if you're going to mix about 10% of that in with coal, so you have a 10% mixture of coal and biomass, it would add about $3.30 per customer to their bill. If you had a 30% mixture, it would be about just under $10 up to the bill. The market probably isn't ready for that yet. So, but the thing about some of this research is, if you only assume that the market conditions are going to stay the same now as they will be in 5 years, 10 years, you're going to miss the curve. So, we do have some background and some knowledge as far as what would be an alternative to be able to reduce our coal emissions, and a bioproduct like that might be one of them. We also have looked at developing a feedstock. In this case, it was a 6-year project where they grew hybrid poplar trees, and they developed a planter that planted them, and they developed a harvester that will harvest them. That thing moves about 3 to 5 miles an hour. It loads it directly on a tree and would haul it off to a power plant. there again, we're looking at if you're going to have a biomass economy, you also need to have the infrastructure in place to provide the fuel to power those facilities. Another interesting proposal was from Sartec. They're a company up in in Anoka. They looked at if you take algae and feed it on the flue gas that comes through from a power plant, take an algae that has a high oil content, grind up the algae and then extract the oil. Now you not only take the carbon out of the flue gas, so you reduce your emissions, but you also have a product that you can market and sell. So Sartec looked at using algae as a form to reduce flue gas emissions, and also to provide a marketable product that now can, instead of just becoming a carbon reduction thing, you also have a system in place that actually can reduce some of your costs to put that in place. Diamond K Dairy is our one energy production biomass facility that is operational. They became operational in December 31st of 2013. They take the manure from a 1,400 cow dairy, converts it in an anaerobic digester, and uses that to power a generator for heat and power at the dairy. Now, the digesters at dairy farms is not very innovative or new, but for some reason there's lots of them in Minnesota, in Wisconsin. There's not a lot of them here in Minnesota. There's some big ones out in western Minnesota and Hobben Shields and up north of this in Princeton. But for whatever reason, we don't have a lot of digesters in Minnesota. But this was what's kind of unique about this one is the dairy farm here had some concerns as far as odor due to the sulfates, and by running it through the digester, it mineralizes the sulfates and it reduces the sulfates. It makes them a good neighbor. They have bedding now for the dairy cows. It's a multi-generational family farm. You can see them over there, the Krademakers. And they're very concerned about sustainability. That's down by Altura, Minnesota, down west of Rochester. So we've had a few wind projects, which I know I'm running out of time now, so I want to kind of skip through that. And there's a turbulence project, but I want to just touch briefly on some of our solar projects that we've done. We have done some thin film research. One of them was thin film is different from your silicon-based photovoltaics because, as you can see, it's on a film, whether it's plastic or metal or it's a film base. It's not based on a silicon-type glass type panel. What Interphase did, they looked at a reel-to-reel process where you have one big roll of metal foil. It go through these different immersion properties, and you roll up on another roll. So you have this thin film that's has a photovoltaic properties behind it. Then now you can cut it, and you can make whatever panels you might want to on it. So this was to develop a more cost-effective, environmentally friendly method of producing thin film. With this process here, it can be done at atmospheric conditions, so it doesn't have to be a pressurized area. It does not create the hazardous materials that a lot of silicon-based photovoltaics generate. It still doesn't have the efficiency levels as your normal conventional PVs. So for thin film, they still have to work on that aspect. From my perspective, they have to still work on that. But it has some interesting characteristics. Minneapolis Convention Center has gotten a lot of press. We funded this. This is a 600 kilowatt facility on the roof of the Minneapolis Convention Center. We also had freEner-g we funded a solar leasing program. They funded 25 systems on which 18 were residential sites and 7 were commercial sites. They were all under 40 kilowatts in size. These systems here uses microprocessors. So when you go online and you look at how well these are running, you can define which panel is working and which one is not. So this is kind of unique in that it was one of the first ones that we saw that had microprocessors. Minnesota Department of Natural Resources also got a RDF grant. They put in 114 kilowatts of power at 8 state parks around the area. One of the big things they were concerned about is viewscape. Here you got a renewable energy type, but there's nothing really natural about a solar panel. But how do you blend, a renewable resource with, kind of the nature and the state park? And so they put them on the picnic facilities. This was a freestanding system that was kind of back in a marshy area behind at O'Brien State Park. They put some on the roof. If you've ever been to the Fort Snelling State Park, there's a PV panel on the main visitor center there. So they try to show different areas where they could utilize photovoltaics. I'm pretty much done. I could stop now, but I just did want to touch on cycle 4 before Laura gets up. Right now, we are at the beginning of starting having the cycle 4 project start. Minnesota Renewable Energy Society is probably going to be one of the first ones, I think, that is going to actually get going. But for cycle 4, we had 29 total projects. 3 of them are block grants for higher education research. Of the 26 projects, 20 are energy production projects, and 6 are research projects. A big number of those big number of those energy production projects are solar. Some are pretty good sized projects of around 1.1 megawatts, and I think the smallest is around 114, 115, not 1.1 megawatts, 1.1 kilowatts, 1.1 megawatts, and 114 kilowatts on the small end. So there's a big range of projects. We're trying to, like I said, we're not trying to be an incentive program. We want to get some variety out there to show the different the different situations where you might want to use renewable energy. And as I mentioned earlier, a big amount of the capacity to be installed in cycle 4 is going to be solar. That's it. So.